Hello and welcome to the second part of this HDR video tutorial. I'll now show you how to import your photographs into the HDR feature within Photoshop. Now if you've got JPEGs or RAW files, doesn't really matter. All you need to do to start the HDR process is go straight up to File, click once, down to Automate. As standard, Photoshop CS3 will actually hide the HDR feature, so go down to the bottom of the menu and click Show All Menu Items, and the second from the bottom is Merge to HDR. So just click that and that'll open up the HDR dialog, or the first of the HDR dialogs. Next we've got Use Files. So if you've got your files open, you can just click Add Open Files. That'll import all the open files into the window. I need to import my raw files from a folder, so I just use the drop down and select folder, click browse, just quickly browse for those images and click OK, and it'll pull in all of those images from whichever folder it is you've selected. So if you've taken 200 images, it'll import those 200 names, so it's best just to specify the actual images that you want to use within your HDR and move those into a folder in preparation. Right, we don't want this untitled HDR file, so if I just highlight that and click remove, and we now have our three pictures that we want to include within our HDR file. Now the last thing is at the bottom of the screen we have a radio button that says attempt to automatically align source images. And even if you shot on a tripod, it's worth just making sure you've got that button clicked. And what Photoshop will do is it'll just try to align all the pictures so we've got all of the edges and everything true. Once we've got that all set, all we need to do now is click OK, and Photoshop will now run through a series of processes. First of all, just layering each of those images, then setting its HDR blend, and also just realigning each of the layers so that we've got everything perfectly aligned and ready for our HDR conversion. So after a few minutes, we finally have our HDR Merge to HDR dialog window appear, and here we have just a very basic HDR picture. Now we can see a little bit of detail here in the sky. We've got a bit more detail than we had on our standard picture. If we just take a quick look at the dialog window, over on the left hand side we have our source images, and those are the ones that build up our HDR image, and if we just click any of these on and off, we can see the preview window just alter slightly. So if I just switch off the underexposed, we see the correctly exposed and the overexposed merging together, and we've got a slightly overexposed image, and with all three of them back on we've got our full dynamic range. So if you've taken say 4 or 5 images, and then you can pick and choose between them to get the best combination of images. Over on the right hand side we have our OK and cancel buttons, self-explanatory. Next to that, or underneath that, we've got our bit depth. At the moment we're at 32 bit, and we've got options for 16 and 8 bit, and we use those just before we go through to the conversion. Underneath we've got our histogram, which is our white point preview. Now you can adjust this so that when it comes to your actual conversion it's a little bit easier to tell what's going on, and you can set your white point preview by just moving the slider underneath the histogram. Now Photoshop will normally position it in quite a nice place so that you can get a good idea of all of the information within the picture. If you want to move that up and down, do, but it won't actually make any difference to the final result. It's just a preview. Below that we have our response curves. So if you've got a response curve that you've used previously that you think you can use within the HDR picture, then you can import that in and load it, and it'll apply the curve to this image. Or if you've got a series of pictures that you took for HDR on the same day, you might do one and then you want to import that response curve in for the following images. So once we've set that and we've got our combined pictures for our merge to HDR, we can now just click OK, and that'll open that picture at 32-bit within Photoshop. After that we need to change the mode from 32-bit down to 8-bit or 16-bit so that we can actually view the full range on our computers and also send to our printers. So now we've made a few adjustments, mainly to the preview within Merge to HDR. We can now output that into Photoshop. Now, most computers will only display between 8 and 16-bit, so a 32-bit image, although it's 32-bit on your machine, your monitor won't be able to display the full dynamic range. So this is where the bit depth really comes into play. Now we can just click OK and that'll open a 32-bit image within Photoshop, or we can opt to do the conversion directly from Merge to HDR. If we want to do that directly from this dialog, then just go to your bit depth and click 16 or 8-bit, click OK, and the conversion dialog window will appear. Alternatively, if you just want to open that first of all in Photoshop at 32-bit, just click 32-bit and OK. It'll create the HDR file and open it in the standard Photoshop window. Now, in the next part, we're going to convert our 32-bit image within Photoshop into an 8-bit photograph that will actually be able to print.